Hi, this is our group decision project, and we are
MMUGS.
I'm Madeline.
Stefan.
I'm Grant.
I'm Umut.
And I'm Matt.
Awesome, and we decided we wanted to talk about hate speech, and whether there should be or shouldn't be laws against it.
So this is our decision-making process. First, according to Christopher Wolf, we should leave the power of speaking to people themselves instead of handing it over to the government. Because when government are manipulating our freedom of speech, we will be extremely insecure, like what government would do, like what kind of law, to what extent would the law be. And also, according to Baumrun, the internet nowadays magnifies the impact of free speech, and hate speech as a part of the free speech can hurt people a lot. And also, it creates massive and because the internet is like spreading the information very fastly, so the scale of the impact becomes very massive. So the thing that our group is kind of like discussing about is how we deal with that. It's a two-way street. Should we just hand it over to government, or are we gonna deal with it by ourselves? So we think that education and more like dealing with ourselves is the way that we want to do. And also, according to a judge, his name is Radis, he said the way to eliminate hate speech is not to keep your mouth shut, is to let you speak and get educated. Speak more about hate speech is a better way to eliminate hate speech. So that is our decision-making part.
Perfect. So we discussed about the victims. So through this process, there are a lot of losses experienced. First of all, the victims. Like Stefan mentioned, the internet is a huge thing, and on the internet, when you actually use hate speech, you don't specifically hurt one individual. You hurt the race, you can hurt gender, you can hurt the religion and everything. For example, if someone makes a hateful comment on a Muslim person, it doesn't necessarily just hurt that Muslim person, it hurts the whole Muslim community as a whole. So it affects the larger group of people. And also, it's the same thing backwards. The attacker, the person who's making those hateful comments, does become a victim too. The person who the individual represents, the people who the individual represents, become a victim too. There's a new show on Netflix that is called Dear White People. Why does it say Dear White People and doesn't say Dear Mr. X or Y? Because when a white person actually makes a racist comment or a hateful speech, that hurts the whole white community, not the only white individual. So they become a victim too by the actions of the attacker. Also, the victims usually feel insecure when they get attacked. And whose responsibility is that to make them feel secure? That's usually the authorities, the government. And when nothing is done, when no actions are taken, it hurts the government's reputation as well, and these are the three main losses that is experienced.
So individually, we all had some different lessons that we learned. I think one of my biggest things was that through this project, I personally went from I think there should be hate speech laws to I think there shouldn't be hate speech laws, and now I'm back to now there should be hate speech laws. So throughout being exposed to all the different ideas about not just our Constitution and our identity as Americans, but the ideas of other countries and how they've implemented such laws, I was able to shape my ideas further, and they were a lot more fluid than they would have been initially. Regarding leadership, however, this again shows me how you need to be able to understand and identify different viewpoints in order to form your own opinion. And that's, I think, is a really, really valuable tool when you're working in a group with others.
Okay, from my perspective, through this process, what I learned is to seek to understand what other people are really thinking about. It's like, because when we're doing the paperwork, we are analyzing all the authors' opinions and also analyze their bias. It's like, so we need to understand where they stand and why they stand there. And also on the other hand, it's like this project helped me to think both sides because when we're discussing about hate speech, we talked about the victims of the hate speech, the attackers, and also the attackers, because they can also be considered as victims because their group's reputation were hurt. So that is a way of thinking differently. So that was mainly what I've learned during this group project.
The biggest takeaway that I had, I originally did not side for having hate speech laws, just based on natural intuition and just kind of the feeling of our country as a whole and kind of what we wanted to represent. And through this research process, I've grown in kind of the depth of my opinion on it, and kind of getting very different perspectives on everything. And the biggest thing that I took away was that we can't really compare our nation with others and how they rule theirs just because of how we govern ourselves differently, and the importance that is to us with the certain documents that we follow and how much we value those things. And so I think that for the future of leadership, seeking to understand and kind of rather than creating laws, maybe building an education program for this would be a more beneficial way of going about it.
Yes, so seeking to understand the same concept applied to me during my process too, because at first my initial thought that there should be some hate speech laws because that's what I know from home. Like back home, a person cannot offend the president, cannot make hateful comments to each other and not get punished. So that was something that was unique to me. I didn't know anything about it. So as a person, as a leader, I tried to understand through my research. Then I got to realize that this is a different culture and this is a different community and the stuff is not the same that it works back home. So I kind of gained the strength and the quality that I first need to understand my surroundings, the community that I'm in, the culture that I'm in, and then act accordingly. So I now think that it makes sense here that there are no regulations because multiple reasons. The First Amendment, everyone has a right to speech, everyone has a right to speak their mind. So I did change my initial opinion and agree that there shouldn't be any laws on that matter.
One of the lessons I learned, so the main thing I took away from this through the research of many Western European countries that have already introduced hate speech laws, but their hate speech laws are more directed towards never denying the Holocaust. And that more or less opened a bunch of forums to discuss and try and prevent future atrocities like that to happen. That's kind of more or less what I want to take away from this, is to always have an open forum discussion on maybe things that are uncomfortable to speak about, such as the Holocaust or being oppressed and whatnot.
Great.
Awesome. We also had some connections to our class concepts as well.
So to start out, as I mentioned earlier, having an open forum to discussion would benefit society greatly. So the UCLA deans and professors have had a consistent throughout their entire history forum to discuss. So the no growth in the comfort zone stretches from what they did in their articles, like women's suffrage movements, civil rights movements, which at the time were not seen as the norm and were considered hate speech, but because of them, women gained the right to vote, gained the right to more free labor, gained more rights themselves, as did other oppressed people.
And then another concept that we kind of tackled through this project was seeking to understand, and we kind of learned through that in two different ways. The first was through our own personal experience of we were all doing research on understanding how it impacts the victims of hate speech and why these attackers are kind of doing what they do. So that was the first way we did it. The second way we sought to understand was understanding how to kind of tackle this problem as a nation. And one of the ways we talked about that was shown through PBASE and kind of our process of how we would go about that. And so the purpose of of what we would want to do is to create a safer environment for everybody. And so our vision would be to have like a classes or school without hate, and a very just comfortable environment for everybody. So how would we do that would be the ask. And one of our strategies would be to create an education program that would be implemented at the youth level and kind of follows all the way through to make sure that attackers kind of understand what the victims are going through and victims how they can solve these problems and get through the hard times. And the way that we would execute this was make sure that they start these education programs at a young age and follow through all the way through, you know, post-secondary education.
As a conclusion, I think one of the things that we have really brought about with this group is that it was not a very rigid decision at all. We were not very set in our ways initially. Like, we were very open-minded about this whole thing, and it has allowed us to have a very malleable view of the subject, which is a really, really valuable thing when it comes to leadership. Because in a group, if you're not able to adapt to change and able to adapt to different ideas, you're going to alienate other people, and generally it's not going to be super successful. So overall, our decision on hate speech laws, yes, it is a decision, but it's not a firm decision. So in the case where the educational system wouldn't work out right away, then maybe you would look at creating something more rigid. However, that's not necessarily the case, and I think that having such educated minds and having seen so many different opinions and having been able to synthesize them, our decision has been a lot better than it was at the beginning of the project, which I think is the best part of the leadership experience, being able to form such different opinions and growing throughout that entire process. So all in all, I think it was a very successful venture. No one hates each other. Life is good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome.
And
Beautiful
12 minutes.
timing.
12 minutes.
So how
Good
does
job,
that work?
guys.
Do you have to